Here's a sentence that shouldn't be true, and is. The most famous outdoor set in the history of American filmmaking is 45 minutes from a jail cell that once held Charles Manson, and 20 minutes from a guard tower that once held 11,000 American citizens who'd committed no crime at all. Same highway, same orange rock, same sky. Nobody made a movie about that part. So you're doing 70, maybe closer to 80 on 395 and that big wide open stretch between the Sierra Nevadas and Death Valley. There's one stoplight. It catches you red because of course it does. And for 90 seconds, you just sit there next to a gas station in a diner with a neon arrow pointing at nothing in particular. Population, by the sign, about 1,300. You glance left, there's boulders, orange, rounded, stacked like something a giant lost interest in. Glance right, and there it is. So sudden it feels like a mistake. And I've stood on top of that mountain. Mount Whitney, 14,505 feet. Even held the sign. The tallest thing in the lower 48. Just standing there over a main street with a single traffic light. The light turns green. Most people drive on. This is the Velvet Trap, because that pile of rocks behind the gas station, that's the most photographed patch of dirt in American film history. And the mountain looking down on it has watched things happen here that the films never once mentioned. Let's start with the rocks, the Alabama Hills. And that name is its own small American joke, because they were named not for the state, but for a Confederate warship, the CSS Alabama, by pro-Confederate miners who never seen the ship and never would, just like the sound of a rebellion happening somewhere else. That's Lone Pine in one detail. A name borrowed from a war fought 1,000 miles away, stuck under rocks that didn't ask for it. In 1920, a film crew showed up to shoot a Western called The Roundup, and somebody on that crew looked at those weathered granite boulders against that absurd Sierra backdrop and thought, well, this is it. This is what the frontier is supposed to look like. Not the real frontier, the movie frontier, the one America was about to spend the next 50 years convincing itself it remembered. By the 30s, this dusty crossroads was the unpaid, uncredited engine room of the Western genre. John Wayne came through, Gary Cooper, Gene Autry, Hopalong Cassidy, Roy Rogers, Barbara Stanwyck. The Lone Ranger rode here. The Cisco Kid rode here. Humphrey Bogart, a guy who'd built a career playing gangsters, who die in gutters, came to Lone Pine to film High Sierra and walked out the other side a leading man, because the mountain behind him made him look like a man worth rooting for. Here's the number, and it's worth sitting with. More than 400 movies, over 100 TV shows. Gunga Din, How the West Was Won. Decades later, Gladiator, Iron Man, Django Unchained. The rocks don't care what century you point the camera from. So picture the machinery of it. Trucks of cable and canvas backdrop rolling in. Extras in chaps drinking coffee that tastes like the inside of a thermos. A director squinting up at Whitney, checking the light, calling for one more take of a stagecoach that's never actually going anywhere. For 30 straight years, this is the factory floor where America manufactured its own creation myth, the Lone Rider. The empty land, the freedom of wide open country that belongs to nobody, and yet it belongs to everybody. Empty land. That's the phrase doing all the lying. 10 miles north of the camera, there's a turnoff most tourists doing 70 miles or 90 miles an hour never take. We did. And I'm glad we did as a family. In 1942, the United States government built a prison camp on the Alkaline Flat. just past it and called it the Manzanar War Relocation Center. Barbed wire, guard towers, searchlights pointed inward at the people they were supposedly protecting. Over 110,000 Japanese Americans were forced from their homes and into 10 camps like this one during the war. Not because any of them had been convicted of anything, not because any individual evidence existed against a single one of them, but because of their ancestry. That's it, their ancestry. That was the entire legal argument. More than 10,000 people lived behind that wire at Manzanar's peak. Families, kids who went to barbed wire high school, grandparents who'd built lives in California and lost them in a season. And they were put on land that 80 years before the U.S. government had already cleared once, forcibly removing the Paiute people who'd lived there first. Manzanar wasn't an interruption of the desert's relationship with American injustice. It was a continuation of it. There's a plaque there now. It reads, "May the injustices and humiliation suffered here as a result of hysteria, racism, and economic exploitation never emerge again." And here's the detail that should stop your car, and it stopped ours. Hollywood kept filming westerns 10 miles away through the entire war and into the early 50s. The same rocks, the same mountain. Crews were out there shooting cowboys defending freedom and frontier justice, while just up the road, the government was holding American citizens behind wire for the crime of their grandparents' birthplace. Somebody must have noticed. A few did, most didn't. The irony wasn't lost on everyone at the time. It's been lost since, mostly to the drive-thru, to the 70, 80, 90 miles an hour, to a green highway sign that just says Lone Pine and gives you no reason to touch the brakes. Now, if you go 6 miles north beyond that, because the highway isn't finished with you yet, you'll hit a town called Independence, the county seat. Population small enough that you could lose it in a sneeze. And in December of 1969, that town held the most notorious man in America in its jail. Charles Manson hadn't been arrested for murder. He'd been arrested in a raid way out in Panamint Range on suspicion of auto theft and arson, up the Goler Walsh Road, vandalizing a national park with stolen dune buggies. The rangers and deputies who'd hauled him out from under a bathroom sink at a remote desert ranch had no idea, at first, what or who they'd actually caught. It took weeks, and one of his own followers bragging to a cellmate before Los Angeles figured out that the small-time car thief in the Inyo County Jail was the man behind the Tate LaBianca murders. So picture it. Manson in chains, led across the street from a modern jail to the second floor of an old stucco courthouse, doodling on yellow paper while deputies warned reporters not to even ask his name. Across the street, his followers, young women in white dresses, were being bought pie and sodas at a cafe called The Pines, while journalists tried to coax confessions out over coffee. The cafe's boarded up now. The old jail's gone too, torn down around 1990. There's just an empty lot where Manson's cell used to be, sitting quiet between a courthouse that hasn't changed and a cafe that isn't there anymore. 16 miles separate Independence from Lone Pine. On a map, that's really nothing. On this highway, it's the distance between 3 different stories about what America does with the people it decides to lock up. The cowboys who never went to prison because they were never real. The families in prison for being the wrong ancestry. And the one man who actually deserved a cell, caught almost by accident in the same dust. So what do you do with a 16-mile stretch of highway that contains all of that? You could say it's irony. That's the easy word. But irony implies somebody planned the joke and nobody did. What actually happened is simpler and stranger. This is just what happens when you put a really tall mountain next to a bunch of really good looking rocks. People come. Some of them come to tell stories. Some of them come to lock other people up. Sometimes, God help us, the same 10-mile stretch of desert does both at once. And nobody in the moment seems to notice they're standing in the same place. That's not a Lone Pine story. That's an American story wearing a cowboy hat to distract you. The myth of the frontier was never really about the land. It was about who got to be free on it and who got to decide. Lone Pine just happened to be where the cameras were running long enough and close enough to the wire that you can still see both halves of the picture if you're willing to pull over. The light at Lone Pine's one intersection turns green eventually. It always does. The rocks don't move. The mountain doesn't either. Somewhere behind you, 16 miles up a highway nobody stops on, there's an empty lot where a jail used to be and a watchtower that still stands on purpose so it won't be forgotten by accident. Drive on if you want to. The desert's not going anywhere. It never had to chase anybody down. It just waits for the cameras to stop rolling and sees who's still standing there. This has been Drive-Thru Towns. I'm your host, Andrew Wilcox. A special thanks to Chloe Jones for providing our music. If you enjoyed this journey, please follow the podcast to stay updated on all our upcoming episodes. To keep the conversation going, you can connect with me on Instagram at 50 State Family. Find me on LinkedIn under Wilcox Legal, or reach out directly via email at wilcoxlegal@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next road.
'Cause I was wandering free on an American dream with a million things to see and do. But it's all good, I'm fine. Had the time of my life, 'cause I